I am 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 and welcome to Jai Hind Classes 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. In this video, I will explain Class 12th Political Science Chapter 7, which is Regional Aspirations. In the first chapter of this book, we studied about the nation-building process of our country in the first decade after independence. But you must know that nation-building is something that cannot be accomplished once and for all. As the time goes by, many new challenges related to nation-building came up, and many of the old challenges had never been fully resolved. In this chapter, we will be studying how in the democratic forefront after the experiment of junta government in 1980, when political stability came up in our country, regional aspirations came up. How from people from different regions took even violent means and people's assertions became armed in our country for their regional aspirations. We will be asking some questions related to regional aspiration. Firstly, what were the factors that contributed to the tensions arising out of the regional aspirations? Secondly, how did the Indian state responded to these challenges? Thirdly, what were the lessons learned from all those regional aspirations for the ideology of unity in diversity? As you already know that in our country, unity in diversity is a very popular phrase. This is the main idea of our country. That is, we need to maintain the distinctiveness of our country leading to a national unity. But we will be seeing the regional aspirations in our country, like in the region of Assam, in the region of Mizoram, Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. In these regions, many struggles, violent means of struggles came up by the people, and where the government had to do a lot of work for maintaining the democracy, the national unity and integrity of the country. Otherwise, regionalism could lead to a new partition of the country as well. So we will be discussing about regional aspiration, taking some examples to understand our past in a better way. And without any further ado, let's get started with the first topic, which is the region and the nation. Now, in the 1980s, after the 1980s, what happened that in many regions, not just for their own region, in many of the regions, many movements came up, many struggles came up, and government had to do a lot of negotiations with the people who were doing the movement, with the groups that were having the movement in different regions, and mostly they were from the northeastern region of our country, from the region of Punjab in our country. But you know what, that even with these negotiations, there were still a lot of casualties in the country. Why? Because before these negotiations, the movements were so violent that there were many losses in our country. And that is why it is very important to know that how did India balance region and the nation? Let's understand that firstly with the Indian approach. Now, what was the Indian approach? Till now, we have already studied the political science of class 11th about the Indian Constitution, and we have already discussed about the process of nation building. One thing we come to know is that India looks at diversity not as a challenge to national unity. It does not see regionalism or a kind of diversity, regional diversity in our country, as a threat to national unity and integrity, in contrast to many of the European countries. Even though many of the movements were outside the Indian framework, we still had led them because we believed in the distinctiveness of our country. Now, if you look at the European countries, in many of the European democratic countries, they look at distinctiveness, the regional diversity, as a threat, as a very big threat to the national unity of the country. But that is not the case in India. What we did was that we gave them more autonomy to have them in our country, which could strengthen the unity of our country as well. Two things that come by this point are, Firstly, in Indian democracy, we give a lot of autonomy to the different regions of our country. Secondly, to the issues and conflicts and problems of all the regions of our country, the Indian state gives adequate attention. That means that there will be development of all the region. So we can say that Indian approach of regionalism is far more different from the European countries. However, even with all these things, there are still many tensions in the country. So what were those areas of tensions? Let's see that as well with the next topic, which is areas of tension. Now you know what, that after in the 1980s, from the period of 1970s to 1980s, there were many tensions that came up. Firstly, in the region of Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir's issue even today persists. We know that there are still a lot of conflicts with the controversies with the POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And you know what, that from the time of independence, Jammu and Kashmir has been a major controversial area of our country. And it was not just the conflict between India and Pakistan, it also included the people of Kashmir Valley. Another point was that at the same time, in many of the southern states of our country, many mass accusations were seen against the imposition of Hindi as the official national language of our country. As you already know that the continuous use of English as the official language was to be stopped in 1965. But what happened that many of the leaders from the southern states of our country had mass accusations against this. They were against the imposition of Hindi as the national language of our country because they believed that they were non-Hindi speakers, so it would be hard for them. And that is why we could see that at that time there were many mass accusations. And in contrast to them, in northern states we saw that pro-Hindi accusations were seen that were demanding for imposition of Hindi as the official national language of the country. Another point was that the issue of northeastern states. Now, if we look at the northeastern states, what happened that in many of the regions, people had no popular consensus about being a part of India. In the state of Nagaland, in the state of Mizoram, even many violent accusations came up that we will be studying later in this chapter. So we could see that in south, the Dravidian movements, in north, the pro-Hindi accusations, in northeast, there were no consensus about being a part of India, and the issue of Jammu and Kashmir and the issue of Punjab as well. These all issues directly or indirectly happened around the same time. So it was very hard to maintain, to challenge, to respond to all these areas of tensions. Now let's have a look at all these areas of conflict one by one. Firstly, let's have a look at the case of Jammu and Kashmir. So Jammu and Kashmir. Now we have already studied about the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which now has been revoked, which granted special autonomy, special provisions to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now it's a union territory, not a state of our country. But in spite of the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, this state had always been a part of violence, always been a site of cross-border terrorism and deaths of many innocent civilians, militants and security personnel. There are a lot of terrorist activities going on in this state as well. So we can say that even when Article 370 was there, this state faced a lot of violence, cross-border terrorism and political instability in the state. Now let's have a look at the background of Jammu and Kashmir as well. Geographically, what are the population? How is the composition of population in the state? Now, if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, it can be divided into three regions. Now, this state is a union territory, but we are talking about when it was a state of the country. So, it could be divided into three major regions. First was Jammu, then Kashmir, and then Ladakh. Now, the region of Jammu consisted of foothills and plains. Hindus were the predominant population here, with being minority of Muslims and Buddhists, Sikhs as well. The second region was of Kashmir. Now, Kashmir region consisted mainly of the Kashmir Valley. The people, Muslims, were the major population here, which were advocated by minorities such as Hindus and Sikhs. The third region was Ladakh, which is a mountainous region, and it is sparsely populated due to having many climatic conditions, and the population could be equally divided between Muslims and Buddhists. So we can say that these three were the major regions of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, what was the root of the problem? Let's see that as well. Roots of the problem. We know that in 1947, Jammu and Kashmir was a princely state, and I told you in the first chapter as well that this was a state where mostly there were Muslims, but the ruler was a Hindu who was Maharaja Hari Singh. Now, Maharaja Hari Singh not wanted to be a part of India or Pakistan. He wanted Jammu and Kashmir to remain as an independent nation, but Pakistan wanted Jammu and Kashmir to be its part because it considered Kashmir Valley to be its natural part as it had a lot of Muslim population. So what happened that in 1948, Pakistan sent a lot of tribal infiltrators in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, at that time, Maharaja Hari Singh had to ask military help from India. Now, India played a big game as well. There was our popular leader, Sardar Patel, who said that we will provide the military assistance only when they sign the instrument of accession. And we already know that instrument of accession was the instrument. If it was signed, it meant that Jammu and Kashmir would become a part of India, would become a state of India. So India provided military help after the Maharaja had signed the instrument of accession. Now it can be considered a part of India. In 1948, a kind of a proxy war broke out between India and Pakistan, and then it was sent to UN on 1948 to be resolved because there were many issues that came up. A large part was under the control of Pakistan. On 21 April 1948, the United Nations gave a three-step resolution. Firstly, it asked the Pakistani tribal infiltrators from the region of Kashmir to go back to their country. Secondly, it asked the Indian government to reduce its forces in Jammu and Kashmir to maintain law and order. Thirdly, it asked India progressively to hold a plebiscite for the people's approval, for the people's opinion, after the situation has been stabilized. However, even after these three-step resolution, nothing happened in the state. The condition of state even worsened. Now, there was a popular party at that time, which was National Conference. The leader of National Conference was Sheikh Abdullah, who was having a lot of movement, who was doing a lot of movement to dethrone the king and wanted to be in power in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. After that, after 1948, he wanted to be in power in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and he did a lot of movements. He even rejected the idea of the United Nations. So let's see that what happened after 1948 with the next subtopic, which is external and internal disputes. Now, what were the internal and external disputes of Jammu and Kashmir? Externally, it was facing the challenge from Pakistan because Pakistan from a long time was considering Kashmir as its natural part. It wanted Jammu and Kashmir to be its own part, and that is why it did a lot of mass accusation, a lot of cross-border terrorism, a lot of militant activities in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Secondly, you must have heard about POK and IOK. That is, IOK is Indian occupied Kashmir and POK is Pakistan occupied Kashmir. What is the difference between them? The difference lies in 1948 when the troops of Pakistan infiltrated in Jammu and Kashmir, they covered a large part of Kashmir. Now at present date, that is called Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which India claims to be illegal, as it was claimed illegally by the Pakistani forces, while Pakistan claims it as Azad Kashmir. Now in Urdu, Azad means free or independent, so it calls POK as a free region, as free Kashmir, while the Indian Kashmir it claims as a kind of bounded to Indian state, Indian country. Now externally it was facing the challenge from Pakistan. What about internally? Internally, people had a lot of opinions. People from outside the state of Jammu and Kashmir considered the Article 370 as a threat to national unity. They considered Article 370 that it did not include the state of Jammu and Kashmir completely in India, and that is why they wanted Article 370 to be revoked. While the people of Article 3 living in Jammu and Kashmir considered Article 370 democratic, now they wanted it to be more stringent. They particularly had three grievances. Firstly, there was a promise by the Indian government that when the situation has been stabilized in the state of Kashmir, what would happen that they would hold a plebiscite in the region, but that never happened. Secondly, they considered that democracy, how it had been practiced in other parts of the country, was not as practiced in the state of Kashmir. It meant that democracy was not institutionalized in Jammu and Kashmir very well. Thirdly, they considered the practice of Article 370 almost eroded. They said that they had a big grievance that even though in the constitution we have the Article 370, but that is never in the practice. So these three were the major grievances that they asked for, and that is why they wanted greater autonomy by strengthening the Article 370 of our constitution. But we already know that it has been revoked now. How it was revoked, we will see that as well later in the chapter. So we can say that Kashmir was facing internal and external challenges. Now let's see what happened after that with the next subtopic, which is politics since 1948. So politics since 1948. Now let's see that what happened after 1948. As we already know that Muhammad Abdullah came in power. He was now the Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. When he came in power, he formulated a lot of land reform policies and a lot of welfare policies. However, he was in conflict with the Indian National Congress, and that is why he was detained for a very long time. He was imprisoned for a very long time. What happened that many agreements to reach an agreement, many attempts between him and the Indian National Congress to reach an agreement was made, but they were never done. In 1965, a new change to the Constitution of India was done, from which now the post of Prime Minister of Jammu and Kashmir was to be designated as the Chief Minister, and you know what, that 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 became the first Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. It was from the party of Indian National Congress. In 1974, Indira Gandhi and Muhammad Abdullah reached an agreement, and now they were a kind of in an alliance. In 1977, Muhammad Abdullah again came in power, and he completed his term till 1982, but he died in 1982, and that is why after his death, his son Farooq Abdullah came in power. Now, Farooq Abdullah came in power, but what happened that the alliance between the INC and NC received a lot of setback from the people. Now, people's, you could say that trust from democracy was going away because of seeing various political instability in the state. Now, they were thinking that from the other state, the situation of Jammu and Kashmir was very much different. So, what happened that after 1982, Farooq Abdullah came in power, and when the elections were to be held again in 1989, they again formed an alliance. The INC in the National Congress and the NC National Conference again formed an alliance. So what happened with that alliance? Let's see that as well with the next topic, which is insurgency and after. You know what, that when elections were held in 1989, a lot of people turned out. The results were in the favor of the alliance of INC and NC. But what happened that people believed that the results of this election did not reflect the people's opinion, people's choice, and they believed that in elections there were many malpractices and rigging, and that is why a lot of insurgency rose up in the state. You know what, that in the 1990s period a lot of extraordinary violence was seen in the region. You must have heard about the Kashmir Pandits. You know that many of the Kashmir Pandits had to flee from the region because of this extraordinary violence against them. A lot of Kashmiri Pandits died, a lot of innocent civilians died, militants died as well. So we can say that an extraordinary violence was there, and that is why president's rule had to be imposed because of the failure of law and order in the state. It was only in the 1996 when the elections were again held up. In the 1996 elections, what happened that that there was a new party that came up, which was People's Democratic Party. It came in power in 2002. Why not in 1996? Because in 1996 still there were many kind of conflicts that came up, many kind of violence came up, and that is why it was only in 2002 when there was a bit of stability. It was not that much stability, but at least better than before, and that is why in 2002 the alliance of People's Democratic Party and Indian National Congress rose in power. Now what happened with that alliance? Let's see that as well with the next topic, which is 2002 and beyond. Now, according to the agreement in the alliance in the coalition government of INC and PDP, in the first 3 years from PDP, the leader would be Muhammad Saeed. Now, this Mufti Muhammad Saeed was a leader from People's Democratic Party, and after him, a leader of Indian National Congress had to come in power. But you know what? That in 2006, president's rule was imposed in the state, and it was only removed in 2008. That means that the term of office of this coalition government could not be held up completely, because president's rule was imposed due to insurgency in the state, due to a lot of terrorism. And you know what, that in this Pakistan played a very big role. It supported terrorism in our state. We already know that Pakistan advocates a lot of terrorism. It supports, promotes, it holds up a lot of terrorism in many of the states of our country, and that is why Jammu and Kashmir has been a very violent and controversial region. After that, you know that in 2002, the PDP and INC coalition came in power, which now again the elections were to be held in 2008. The president's rule was removed in 2008, and in 2009, PDP again came in power. Now at that time the leader was Mufti Muhammad Saeed, but after his death his daughter became the first woman chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Mehbooba Mufti, who was the daughter of Muhammad Mufti Saeed, became the first chief minister, first female chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir. Now during her tenure, a lot of terrorism, cross-border terrorism, cross-border activities were seen. A lot of external as well as internal militant activities were seen. And she came in power with the support of BJP. You know what, in 2014. In 2009, the PDP came in power. Mufti Muhammad Saeed came in power, and in 2014 elections, you know that in 2014, from the last 25 years, voters turned to be the greatest. So we can say that people participated a lot in the 2014 elections, and in that election the coalition was between the BJP and PDP. So in that election, Mehbooba Mufti came in power, became the first female chief minister of Jammu and Kashmir, and during her tenure a lot of militant activities were seen, a lot of violence was seen, and that is why in 2016 president's rule had to be imposed, and BJP withdrew its support as well. So we can say that now her government could not be stood for long because the support was withdrawn from the BJP. And in 2019, as we all know, that the Jammu and Kashmir States Reorganization Act was passed, according to which Article 370 was abolished. Now the special status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir was abolished, and the state was divided into two union territories. First was Jammu and Kashmir, second Ladakh. So we can say that at the present time, J&K is not at all a state, it's a union territory, and Ladakh also became a union territory. You know what, that these two union territories showcases a lot of diversity for a country, be it the linguistic diversity, be it the regional diversity, be it the religious diversity, be it the ethnic diversity, cultural diversity. A lot of diversities are seen just in these two regions, and that is why the Article 370, as we all know, that was revoked in 2019, and the special status of Jammu and Kashmir was removed. So we saw a long journey of Jammu and Kashmir, and you already know that even today there are many cases of terrorism attacks, militant activities, a lot of insurgency in those regions, and some of the military areas are not even safe for the common people. So we can say that this was a long journey before the special status of Jammu and Kashmir was removed. This was the first example of regional aspiration, because people were now considering for a demand of another country, Kashmir, after the 1990s, when in 1990s a lot of violence was seen. I told you that a lot of violence was seen, and in that a lot of movements were there for a separate country for the Kashmiris. So we could say that for the Kashmiris, they wanted a separate country, and we could see that a lot of violence was seen, especially against the Kashmiri Pandits. Now let's have a look at another example of Punjab. Now, if we talk about Punjab, in 1966, it was bifurcated into Punjab and Haryana. A new state, Punjab, was created for the Punjabi-speaking people. You know what, that almost all of the states got bifurcated, got divided on the basis of language in the 1950s, but Punjab had to wait till 1966. So we could say that it was first of its grievance. Another was that the major popular party there was Akali Dal, which consisted of many Sikh leaders, and it played a very important role in the movements of Punjab, in the regional aspirations of Punjab. So what was the case with Punjab? Let's see that as well with the first subtopic in this topic, that is political context. Political context, which played a very important role in the insurgency of Punjab. Now in 1967 and again in 1977, Akali Dal came in power in Punjab, but they had seen that even after they came in power, even after the withdrawal of their boundaries, their political position was still precarious. There were majorly three reasons behind it. Firstly, the central government intervened a lot in the state of Punjab. What they did was that in the midterms, they would dismiss the government. So dismissal of the government by the central government was not at all approved by Akali Dal. Secondly, there was this consensus that similar to many religions, similar to Hinduism, even in Sikhism, what is there is that class and caste differentiation, and the INC got more support from the Dalits, be it from Hindus or Sikhs, than the Akali Dal. So we can say that from the lower sections of the people, because we know that in the Indira Gandhi's term, the vulnerable section was targeted, and that is why INC got a lot of support from the Dalits of Sikh people, and Akalis failed to do so. So this was the second reason why they were seeing that their political position was precarious, and that is why they wanted to work more on it. And the third problem was that the Akalis did not have a lot of support from the Hindus. So we can say that these three were the main reasons why they felt that their political position was precarious. And what they did was that in 1972 at Anandpur Sahib, they held a resolution which was for the regional autonomy of Punjab. Now they wanted a resolution of the center-state relations. They wanted a reformation of the center-state relations. Secondly, they wanted more autonomy, the regional autonomy of Punjab. So we can say that what they did was that in 1973 they held a kind of resolution at Anandpur Sahib. Now their main focus in that resolution was that they would want their Bolbala. Bolbala in their language means hegemony or the dominance of the Sikhs. That is why they wanted the betterment of their political position. So we can say that in 1972 they held up a resolution. However, these movements did not have even support from the masses of Sikhs. We can say that they did not have a large support from the Sikh masses. But they did get support in the 1980s. Why so? Because in 1980s the issue of river waters came up and people were really angry about it, about the distribution of river water of rivers such as Ravi and Bias. So we can say that in 1980s these movements got support. But in 1973 when the resolution was done, when the resolution was initiated, at that time there was not that much support. Now let's see that what happened in the 1980s with the next subtopic, that is cycle of violence. Now you know what, that in 1980s a cycle of violence started. The moderate Akalis turned into extremists. Extremists, as you already know, that are radicals. They could go to any land for their support, for their demands. So we can say that the moderate Akalis turned into extremists, and that is why violence could now be seen. And you know that there was a popular demand about Khalistan, a separate country for the Sikhs in the region of Punjab. So we can say that there were many Khalistanis at that time as well, and there was a popular Khalistani leader, 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪, who was the main leader, and he had his headquarters in the holy shrine of the Sikhs, that is the Golden Temple in Amritsar, Punjab. Now, what could the government do? Firstly, the government tried to appease them. And you know what? At that time, Indira Gandhi was in power. And she, for the appeasement of the Sikhs, she appointed a Sikh as the president of the country. You know that at that time, Gyani Zail Singh, he was chosen as the president of the country because he was a Sikh. So to appease the Sikhs. But nothing changed for a better way. A lot of violence turned in the state of Punjab. A lot of people that were non-Sikhs were killed as well. You know that 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 was a major extremist. So many people were killed as well. And that is why in 1984 Operation Blue Star was done. What was Operation Blue Star? It was in the holy shrine of Golden Temple, you can say, and there the government used armed forces to remove all the militants, and the government did succeed. So, and all the militants died in that operation. However, this movement got a lot of resentment because the sentiments of the Sikhs was hurt deeply, as Golden Temple was their main worshipping place. They had a lot of emotional and sentimental attachment to that temple, and that is why this movement, this Operation Blue Star, had a lot of setbacks as well. And that is why on 31st October 1984, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own bodyguards outside her residence, because the bodyguards were Sikhs and they were not at all happy with the Operation Blue Star. And you know what, an interesting fact is that when Operation Blue Star was to be done, the president of the country was not at all informed, because the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi suspected that he would tell all the Sikhs, because he was a Sikh himself. That is why he was not informed about the Operation Blue Star. So we can say that due to the Operation Blue Star in 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own bodyguards because they were resenting the operation. Now, this turned to a lot of violence against Sikhs, especially in the national capital of Delhi. You know what? That in the national capital, more than thousands of Sikhs were killed, and they were killed like from the buses, from the public transport. The males were killed. If the males of the families are killed, of course, they would have a great emotional loss, but at the same time, they would face heavy financial losses as well. The families would suffer for the next generations. So we can say that a lot of violence in many parts of the country, in 𝓥𝓲𝓫, in Shahs, in different regions of the country, hundreds of Sikhs were killed. And the period of 1984 itself is called very much violative. It was very much violent, and whenever it is remembered, it's remembered as against Sikhs. So we can say that this is how cycle of violence took place. Firstly, the extremist Akalis were there. Then we saw that how the situation turned up with Operation Blue Star. Operation Blue Star is very important. You must remember it. And how this turns into another violence after the assassination of the Prime Minister. In 2005, the Prime Minister of the country was Manmohan Singh, and in the Parliament speech that he gave, he expressed his condolences against the, you could say, Sikh violence, and he expressed his condolences about his, you could say that sadness over the deaths of many Sikh fellows. So we can say that now the situation seems to be have normalized, but at that time there was a cycle of violence that was created. What happened after that insurgency? Let's see that as well with the next subtopic, which is Road to Peace. How was peace established in Punjab? Now, in 1984, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated, and after her, in 1985, her son Rajiv Gandhi became the Prime Minister, and he initiated negotiations with the moderate Akalis, but it was only in the mid-1990s that situation was stabilized in Punjab. You know what, that in 1990s, elections were to be held, but they could not be because of the voters turnout. There were a lot of violence that were going on. People were not ready to hold up the elections, and that is why voters turned to be very low. Finally, the peace was established in 1997. The first election after the militancy period were done. And in 1997 election, the coalition of Akali Dal and BJP got a lot of massive majority, a lot of massive support from the people. So we can say that in 1997, the first ever election after the militancy era were held up. And how was the peace established? Was it like overnight we just came across peace? No. What happened that in 1985, when negotiations were made with the moderate extremists, with the moderate Akalis, Rajiv Gandhi gave many options. Firstly was that a separate tribunal would be set up for the distribution of river water of Ravi and Bias rivers between Rajasthan, Punjab and Haryana. Secondly, a commission would be set up to solve the dispute between Punjab and Haryana. Thirdly, Chandigarh would be given to Punjab as well. We already know that Chandigarh is the capital of two states, Haryana and Punjab. So it was in that negotiation as well. And that is how peace was established. But we still see that there are some Khalistanis there who demand for Khalistan, a separate nation for the Punjabis, for the Sikhs. Now let's have a look at the third example, that is the northeastern part of the country. The Northeast. Okay, now let's look at the Northeast. Now, in the northeastern part of the country, there are 7 states which are collectively called as the 7 sisters of our country. They include Nagaland, Tripura, Meghalaya, Manipur, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh. Now, these 7 sisters hold up importance as the northeastern states, and there is one brother of these states, that is the Sikkim. You know what, that they only consist 4% of the India's population, but they hold up twice as much of its area shared. You know what, that these regions are connected to India with a border of 22 kilometers, with a corridor of 22 kilometers, which is very narrow, and that is why it is called as chicken's neck as well, which means that it's too narrow, and that's why it becomes a very strategic point from the point of view from military strategic points. It becomes very important. Now, talking about Eastern states, in 1963, Nagaland was created as a separate state. In 1972, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, and Meghalaya became independent states. And in 1987, so late after independence, Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram became separate states. How did they become separate states? We'll see that as well. The northeast states faced a lot of problems. Firstly, when they became a part of India, they were reduced to a landlocked states, and thus the economy of the northeastern states was affected. Secondly, the backwardness of the northeastern states. You know what, that the northeastern states mostly comprise of the tribal population, and that is why they are backward compared to other parts of the country, and there was a lack of development in those regions. You know what, the lack of communication between the northeastern states and the central government, the mainstream society of the country, even added more fuels to the problem. We must have seen that many people of the North Indian states don't consider Northeasterns as Indians. We have seen that people calling them Chinese or Nepalis. That's very common in India. In many of the parts of the country, it still persists. Why is that so? Because the culture of Northeastern state was introduced very later on. At that time, there was literally no communication, no awareness of the northeastern people. Another point is that northeastern part of the country shares borders with Bangladesh, with you can say China as well. And as you already know, China is a very major enemy of our country. So it becomes very strategic from military point of view as well. Now, there were mostly three problems that we faced in the northeastern part of the country. Firstly were the demands for autonomy. Secondly were the secessionist movements in all the northeastern parts. Thirdly was the resentment towards the outsiders, because the tribals, as you already know, one of the characteristics is that they are very much with their own society. They don't like interference from the migrants or from the outsiders. So we'll see that point as well. Starting point from the point one, which is demands for autonomy. So what were the demands for autonomy? You know what, that when northeastern states became part of India, till then all the states except Manipur and Nagaland were, you could say, part of Assam. It meant that Assam consisted all of those states, and that is why many movements came up against this. Why? Because they considered that the Assamese government was imposing the Assamese language on them, and now they considered their tribal identity, and that is why government of India had to ultimately create not just one state but more than one state. Though initially the demand was just for one tribal state, but government, after a lot of thinking, after a lot of precaution, they saw that there was a need for more than one state, and that is how over the time states like Arunachal Pradesh, you can say Tripura, and Mizoram, Meghalaya were created. However, even after that, there were still many demands. There were three major communities: Bodos, Karbis, and Dimasas, who were demanding for their own autonomy. That is, they were demanding for separate states. But the government could not do so, because we could not create smaller and yet smaller states. We had to see the geographical position as well. We could not let every other community of the country to have their own states. And that is why, using the provisions of the Indian Constitution, we tried to appease them. How so? We gave them autonomy in their own state. In Assam region, we gave them autonomy. How so? To the Dimasas and Karbis, we gave district councils, and to the Bodos, we gave them autonomous councils. So we can say that the problem of autonomy was resolved by a clear conscience of the Indian central government, with a help from the commissions as well, by setting up different commissions, and that is how the demands for autonomy were solved of. Now, even bigger problem was the demand for different countries, that is the secessionist movements. You know what, that compared to the secessionist movement, as you already know that the term secessionism means that the separation from, formally the separation from any federation, from any organization. That is, in many parts, people were now demanding as a separate country. We'll see that as well why they were demanding so, but let's see that compared to the demands for autonomy, these problems were harder to tackle because the demands for autonomy could be tackled using the provisions of the Indian Constitution, but the demands for secessionism, for a separate country, were harder to be tackled. There were no constitutional provisions. Secondly, these were not just with constant, you could say that impulsive demands of the people. They were consistent principal demands of the people, and that is a consistent movements were there. For example, in Assam there was the district Mizo Hills, and Mizo Hills considered themselves to be independent. They never considered themselves as a part of the British government, and that is why after independence they considered themselves not to be part of the Indian Union, and that is why they formed Mizo National Front, demanding for a separate country for the Mizos, and their leader was 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. So the MNF was formed by 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪, and he continued the struggle for a separate country for the Mizos for 2 decades. It was only after 2 decades that the issue, the conflict was resolved. You know what, that the MNF took on the provisions like guerrilla war. They got support from Pakistan and they took shelter in the then East Pakistan. And what did the Indian army do? They took force and suppressed them by using the armed forces, and that repressed the common people as well. Common people became victims as well, because whenever these kind of civil wars go on between the you could say the government and the protesters, what happens? Common people became victims as well. Finally, the issue was resolved in 1986 when Rajiv Gandhi signed an accord with 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪, and 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 became the chief Minister of Mizoram. Mizoram became an independent state of the country while having some special provisions. So we can say that in 1986 the demand was stopped by 𝓒𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 in return for Mizoram as an independent state with some special provision, and him being the chief minister of the state. Another story of secessionist movement is of Nagaland, which did not yet have such a happy ending. Why so? Because you know that in Nagaland in 1951 there was a leader, 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪. Now, 𝓥𝓲𝓫𝓱𝓪 was a leader who was very popular in the Raga region, and they wanted themselves to form a separate country. Why? Because they completely believed that they were a different part from the Indian Union, and that is why they believed that they should be a separate country for themselves. And that is why, mobilizing all the Nagas, they launched a popular struggle, a popular, you could say, a violent mass agitation that happened. And how was it dealt? It took a lot of time. It took a lot of time for the Indian government to negotiate with them, because they were not ready to negotiate. Nagas were not at all ready to negotiate with the Indian government to form, you could say, a independent state in the country. How did India deal with it? By using force as well. You know what, that the Naga National Council, a part of the section, you could say a section of the protesters, signed an agreement with the Indian government that Nagaland would be formed as an independent state rather than an independent country. However, other sections of rebels were not at all happy with it. So we can say that still in many parts of Nagaland, there were still many rebels going on for Nagaland to be as an independent country. However, they had already signed an agreement with India, and that is why they had to remain as an independent state of the country. So we can say that Mizoram had such a kind of happy ending, but talking about Nagaland, it was not such a happy ending. Now, we have seen the two first problems. That is, firstly, you have the demands for autonomy. Secondly, you have the secessionist movements. Thirdly, we have the movements against outsiders. Now, you know what, that from the time period of 1966, the Bangladesh war broke out, Indo-Pak war broke out. In 1971, it broke out. What happened that before the breaking of war, before the war was started in 1960s, a lot of migration was seen in the northeastern part, especially in Assam. And that is why in Assam, movement against outsiders, that were the migrants in the region of Assam, was seen from a period of 1979 to a period of 1985. Why? Because they considered the people who were the outsiders to be dominating. What would happen if these Bengali Muslims, because the Assamese believed that these migrants, these outsiders were mostly Bengali Muslims from the then East Pakistan, and that is why they thought that if they were so much migrating in the state of Assam, then Assamese would become minority and Bengali Muslims would become majority. So the first fear was that. Secondly, there was a scarcity of resources, and that is why they did not want to share it with other outsiders. Thirdly, the lack of job opportunities, the unemployment persisted in the region, and that is why there was a lot of competition related to job opportunities, and surely they could not give up to the outsiders. So they believed that the development of the state would only be if there were no outsiders in the region, if there were no migrants in the region. In the 1979, what happened? A students' organization was formed, that was ASU, All Association of Students Union. It was there. All Assam Students Union was there, ASU in short, which initiated mass agitation against the outsiders. You know that Assam lacked economic development despite having resources such as oil, tea. They believed that the oil was not at all used for the benefit of the Assamese, rather it was transported to other regions. Thirdly, the demand was that all those migrants should be deported. They should be identified and then deported their own country. They should not be in the region of Assam because they belong to Assam and they belong to their own country. So the movement took place from 1979 to 1985 and it gained a lot of popular support from Assamese, and that is how it formed a very big mass agitation. It formed as a big popular mass agitation, and that is why in 1985 they reached an agreement with Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister. What happened with that agreement? You know that with that agreement, the movement was stopped and all those migrants who came before the Bangladesh war or since Bangladesh war in 1971 were to be identified and had to be deported. So you could say that now the outsiders would be reduced and then the movement stopped. But what happened? Still the outsider persists. Even today there are a lot of migrants that go there. There are a lot of outsiders that settle there. So we can say that the northeastern states are very aggressive, resented to the, you could say, the outsiders or the migrants, and that is why we have the sixth schedule in the Indian Constitution, which gives the tribals the right to preserve their culture, to retain their identity by preserving their regions, by preserving their areas. You know that we have a fundamental right, that is to reside in any part of the country, to move in any part of the country, but there were reasonable restrictions in that, and in some of the tribal regions we are restricted to move. So we can say that they have been protected by the Indian Constitution as well. Now, the next and last topic of this chapter is accommodation and national integration. Now, let's say that what are the lessons that we learned from all these three examples. First was the example of Jammu and Kashmir that resolved with so much violence, extraordinary violence. Second was the situation of Punjab, which was resolved with Rajiv Gandhi and Longowal Accord in 1985. Third was the situation of Northeast. Now, let's see what are the lessons learned from it. First is that all the regional aspirations are a part of democracy, democratic processes. Why they are not an aberration, not a kind of, you could say, against democratic processes. Even in small democratic countries like the United Kingdom, they face regional aspirations. Like, for example, in United Kingdom, you know that in Scotland, in Ireland, in Wales, there are regional aspirations for independence, for greater autonomy. In Spain as well, the Basques are for independence. So for such a big and diverse democratic country like India, it's very obvious that there will be regional aspirations and they show the democratic processes of the country as well. Second is that India had a very great approach, that is with negotiation. Even in Jammu and Kashmir, we saw that the situation was boiling up. We saw that MNF was formed. Nagas were demanding for separate country. We saw that against outsiders there were many movements, but we still did negotiations with them rather than using just the force. With Punjab as well, the force was used only after the situation turned into extremist, and then it was resolved with an accord between Rajiv Gandhi and a Sikh leader, that is Harchand Singh Longowal. So we can say that the second lesson learned from it is that we need to have peaceful negotiation, not just being extremist. Force can be used only after peaceful negotiation. When they don't listen to negotiation, then force can be used. Third lesson that we learned from these examples is that the importance of power sharing. You know that in a country, in a democracy, power sharing is important to accommodate the regional aspirations, to give powers to the regions as well, because it is the regions that make up the nation. So they should have a say in their own rules and regulations as well, in their own conditions as well. And that's what they did. We saw it in the northeastern part as well. We did give them autonomy, greater autonomy, by creating more states, by giving them special provisions, because we believe that power sharing is important for a unified federal structure of the country. Fourth lesson we learned from is that economic disparity development can lead to regional aspirations as well. Just look at the northeastern case. We saw that there was a backwardness in the economic development as well. Even if you go today, you would see that compared to many of the northeastern states, the situation of the northeastern states are very less. The economic development is very much less. So if there is less economic development, of course there would be more envy, resentment among the people, and they would see that why aren't we having economic development, and there will be more regional aspirations among the people. Fifth and the last lesson that we learned from this is that the far-sightedness of the Indian constitution makers. They were ready to tackle any issue in the future. They knew that there could be some tensions arising in the different regions, and that is why they included the federal provisions in the Indian constitution for us to tackle with the situations. We dealt with all the situations using the Indian constitution. We saw about the sixth schedule of the Indian constitution, about the article 370 that gave special provisions to Jammu and Kashmir. Why so? Because the leaders, the constitution makers, were so far-sighted. So we can say that this is all the lesson that we learned from the three examples. Now another point that is given in your book is about Goa's liberation. You know that Goa was not ruled by British government, it was ruled by Portuguese, and when Britishers left India, Portuguese were reluctant to go and they were not leaving Goa. What they did was that they did forcible conversion of the Goa's people into Christianity, and they did many suppressions as well. That is why you see that in today's time in Goa there is a lot of influence of Portuguese culture. You would see a lot of churches are built, a lot of Christians are there in Goa. Why so? Because of the influence of the Portuguese. In 1961, Portuguese left India after a movement struggle by the Goa's people from the nationalists of Maharashtra as well, and by the uses of force by Indian government as well, because Goa is an integral part of India. The Portuguese had to leave. Now another situation came up. Maharashtra's political party, that is Maharashtravadi Government Party, was demanding that Goa be a part of Maharashtra, while Goa's people in their popular party, United Goa's people, were demanding that they should be a separate independent state. What happened? The Indian government held up a plebiscite. A referendum was done in which the peoples of Goa, their demands were seen, their opinion was referred to, and in that referendum it was seen that most of the people wanted Goa to be an independent state, and that is how Goa became an independent state. So we can say that that is how Goa was liberated, and that is all we have seen in this chapter. In this chapter, we studied about the regional aspirations. You see that how regions are important. Just think about it. If we did not know how to deal with these regions, what would happen? There could be many, you could say, regionalism in the country. There could be many partitions in the country, factionalism in the country, which could lead to disintegrity of the country as well. So unity and diversity was shown in these processes with examples. Yet some problems still are yet to be resolved. You know that some problems still persist, like for example in Kashmir. So I've covered all the topics, and the next chapter of this book will be covered in the further upcoming video. So stay tuned for upcoming videos. Thank you very much.